So I'll talk about how we use big data, but I think first and foremost it's important to understand, more time that we spent on slicing and dicing numbers, we spent on thinking about this sort of fundamental question of what is the relationship we want to have with our supporters? What is the way in which we wanted to treat individuals? President Obama had 34 million Facebook fans on Election Day. Those people were friends with 98% of the US-based Facebook population. That's more than the number of people who vote. And so we knew that if we treated our people right, if we always gave them a reason to stick with us, to open our content, to continue to stay subscribed, and to hit the retweet button or the share button or the forward button every now and again, we could reach almost everyone in the United States that way. And we could do it more effectively than we as a campaign apparatus could, because people are very skeptical of political rhetoric. They don't trust advertising, but they do trust what they learn from their friends. And so this question of how do we serve our people correctly, how do we treat them in a way that's going to keep them inspired, keep them engaged, and ultimately motivate them to go talk to the people who aren't going to listen to us, was first and foremost. Now, on top of that, sort of relationship building imperative, we, of course, applied an awful lot of data and analytics. So I'll talk about how exactly that worked. The campaign was built on top of 5 key models. And the way these models were built is we have a voter file in the United States. I know that most European countries don't. But there is a publicly accessible database of every voting age person in the United States, where they live, how old they are, if they voted in the past, if they've registered with the Democratic Party or the Republican Party, that sort of thing. And we supplement that voter file, and this is a project that began 20 years ago. It's a multi-election process with additional data. So we knock on people's doors, we call them on the phone, and we ask them about who they support and what they care about and that kind of thing. If they say they care about healthcare, well, needless to say, on an individual basis, we'll follow up and talk about healthcare. But that also allows us to draw broader inferences about the electorate. And so over time, we're able to tell how do women tend to think about the election? How do Latinos tend to think about the election? Are there patterns that can be inferred? One of my favorite is that if you live next door to an Obama supporter, you're 7 or 8 points more likely to be an Obama supporter. And so there's hundreds and hundreds of inputs allowing us to produce a score for each individual person on how likely they are to support President Obama. So that support score, 1 to 100, 100 means we are 100% confident that you support President Obama. 1 or 0, actually I think it was, means you're not at all likely to support President Obama, was the first. But we took it a layer deeper than that, and I think this is a very key thing, and in my private professional life, I see that a lot of companies don't look at this next thing that we looked at, which is that if you're a 50 or a 45 or a 55, someone in the middle, that doesn't necessarily mean you're persuadable, because there's a difference between an undecided and a persuadable voter. We found that there were certain cohorts of undecided voters who we could knock on their door 1,000 times. We could hit them over the head with advertising until until there was no other advertising being served to them on any other channel, and their opinion would not change. We even found that there were certain groups of undecided voters who, if we knocked on their door, called them on the phone, served them with advertising, they actually became less likely to support President Obama. And so, the quest, of course, is to maximize the efficiency of your voter contacts. You only get a finite number, and you don't want to send volunteers or serve advertising to people who aren't going to be persuaded by those contacts. And so the question is not just who's undecided. The question is who's likely to be moved by the work that you were doing. So there was the support score, there was a persuadability score, there was even a contactability score, meaning you could be you could be right in the middle and persuadable, but very unlikely to be reached. Maybe you're not home on Saturdays most of the time, or maybe you don't seem to pick up your phone. And so that would be another thing we wouldn't want to waste our volunteers' time on, we wouldn't want to waste our advertising dollars on. And then, of course, there were 2 supporter-side models. One is a donor model, how likely you were to become a donor, and one is a volunteer model, how likely you were to be willing to volunteer if you were a supporter. So these are the 5 key models that we scored every single person in the United States on, and that kind of informed all the work that we did. Now, in terms of that work, there were 3 sort of categories into which we divided everything that we did. We did fundraising, we did messaging and communications, and we did organizing. So I'll briefly talk about how in each of those 3 categories of work, we tried to marry this question of how can we serve people correctly, how can we treat people in the way that we think is appropriate, in the way that we think will inspire them or engage them, but also how can we do that in the most efficient and data-driven way. Fundraising, I think, is a very good example where, of course, the fundraising message, and you all know that in the States, small dollar donations are very important to how campaigns are run. If people giving $5, $25 online, we understood that no amount of sort of optimization and testing could supplant the emotional relationship that we needed people to have with President Obama if they were going to give. And so, I'll show you some videos and get into this more this afternoon, but everything that we did was based on a foundation of emotion, of a relationship to the candidate and a connection to what he stood for. And so one of the most profitable fundraising programs we ran was something called Dinner with Barack, where if you gave $3 or $5, you had a chance to join him. You would be entered into a drawing to join him for a dinner. And while on the one hand we did this because it was quite effective, on the other hand we did this because it reflected the sort of first principles of the campaign itself. He said, dating back to the first time he ran in 2007, that he did not want to be the kind of candidate who only sat down with lobbyists and multimillionaires and special interests. He wanted to give the small donor, the door-to-door volunteer a seat at the table. And this was a way in which we literally gave him a seat at the table. But of course, on top of that sort of baseline of values and principles and allowing people to feel connected to the man, we tested and optimized everything. So I'll show a few flowcharts this afternoon. Before we would send an email was very important for fundraising. Email doesn't get a lot of attention or a lot of sort of industry press, but it's actually quite powerful. We would send small groups of our email list, a fraction of a percent of our email list, any of 18 different versions of the same email, with anything from major differentials, a totally different tone or message, to minor differentials. I'll cite an example I really like in a second. You get results in real time, of course, so you let these small groups react, and then you send what appears to be the best performer to the remainder of the list. The incredible thing was that we didn't find 5-10% optimizations, 15%. We found sometimes tenfold differences between the best and the worst performer. And individual emails could raise $4.5 million for us. So a tenfold difference is, it could be a $4 million difference. I said the differences between these versions were often quite small, and I think this speaks to the need to test and to the ways in which the human mind is sometimes inscrutable, and there are triggers that we wouldn't necessarily predict in terms of our behavior. We tested the individual line that would ask for money. Please donate. Will you please donate? Please contribute. Any other kind of permutation of that we could think of. And time and time again, the most effective one that we tested was you should donate. Why this word should was so powerful, I don't know, but we raised millions and millions of incremental dollars, truly, just over the word should. And had we sent the exact same kind of content, but said, will you please donate, we would have raised millions and millions of dollars less. So I'll get into that a lot more this afternoon, or if you have questions about it. On the messaging side, I think we had the same kind of mandate of trying to think about how can we express issues to people in a way that the day-to-day politics of Washington, D.C. are so toxic. People are so tired of them, and they don't like listening to politicians go back and forth. But there are issues that people care about and that affect their lives. And so we tried to think about, what was the way in which we could get at the underlying issue, tell the story, or show the infographic, or do whatever it might be that would, truly allow people to connect with with what actually matters to them. But then, of course, again, do it in the most effective possible way. One of the things that's gotten a lot of attention in the States is the different way in which we bought ads relative to the Romney campaign. So I don't know if folks in this room have heard about this, but we looked at those same 5 models, or really, most importantly, the persuadability model, in terms of our ad buying. So the Romney campaign spent a lot of money buying ads on the nightly news. That's a very traditional way to buy ads. We assessed who actually watches the nightly news, and it's not altogether surprising when you think about it. The sorts of people who watch the nightly news are quite politically informed and engaged. We have this all these models where we know who we really want to contact, and and so forth. We also have all this terrific data on Facebook. I mentioned that 98% of the United States on Facebook is a friend of Barack Obama. We created an overlay of those two sets of data, so that if you're a supporter on our website and you watch a video about the president's strong record on the economy, we could say to you, well, don't just share this with anyone. Here are your 10 friends who, as far as we can tell, are persuadable voters. So share it with them first. And by the way, we've ranked them in order of priority states. So here's the ones who live in Colorado, Florida, Virginia, Ohio. Share it with them even more first. And Facebook even has a proximity algorithm, meaning they have a way of detecting if you're close friends with someone. And so we know that friendship is an incredibly important indicator in terms of whether you're likely to believe or disbelieve the information that's presented to you. So we would even be able to rate, we would even be able to suggest to people that they share content with their close friends first. We could do this with any kind of content we had. So as you know, voter registration is not is a very big challenge for campaigns in the States. Voter registration is not neither mandatory nor automatic there. If you were looking at some kind of a graphic about how and when you register to vote, we could say, well, don't just share that with anyone. Here are your friends who, as far as we can tell, are unregistered. So share it with them first. And again, here are the ones who you're close friends with, who live in Ohio or Florida or Virginia or wherever we care about. One question that is frequently debated in the United States is why technology and digital media and social media appear to serve to the benefit of the Democratic Party and President Obama more than to the Republican Party and Governor Romney. And my view on that is this: it's not that we were smarter than they were. It's not that we had a better strategy than they had. I think it really is a philosophical difference between the two campaigns. I think it's important to note that the internet is not a blank slate. It has values, and it's powered by certain values. And those values happen to align with what we as a campaign cared about, this notion of serving people correctly, connecting people, empowering people, allowing them to take the campaign into their own hands. These are the sorts of things that the internet intrinsically does. It connects people, it empowers people, it gives them new resources they didn't have before. And without a genuine and authentic belief in those kinds of principles, it's very difficult to get the tactics right, because the tactics are, your execution of tactics will be intrinsically inauthentic. I think that had Romney developed organizing tools and an organizing platform like the one that we had, he would have had a lot less success convincing his supporters to actually use them. Because he stood for many things, and maybe people support certain of those things, but among them was not this intrinsic belief in empowering people, encouraging them to get involved in the political process, and so there wouldn't have been, again, this feeling of authenticity to the work that was done. And that, I think, is a very important lesson for businesses and for the future. Another question that comes up all the time, of course, is what's next? Where will we be in 2016? And I think the reality is no one knows. And will Facebook have risen or fallen by then? And will Snapchat, I don't know if you have Snapchat here, it's a growing social network in the States. Will it continue to succeed? Where will Twitter be? We don't know. But I think we do know that the overall direction of these technologies is quite clear and is not going to change. All of them together serve to, as the introduction said, serve to empower people, connect people, give them more access to resources, access to information, access to each other, and that's not going to change even if the platforms do. And so this notion of how we treat individuals and how we serve them with the sort of content and the sort of relationship that's going to make them want to get engaged and connect and share content and share facts with their social network is going to be increasingly important to how businesses are able to succeed. Every business is increasingly at the mercy of these people. And as their power rises, as I said at the outset, in my view, so too do their expectations. They expect to be treated well. They expect to be given control over how organizations are run, ways to give feedback, ways to participate in the process. And they're not going to tolerate businesses that don't do that. And again, do that not just in a check the box, sort of fake way, but in a really intrinsic way, in a way that that's clear, that the business has really embraced it from the top down. And so, I think the answers are going to change. Again, Facebook may come or go. It's impossible to know. But this question of how do you treat people, how do you serve people, will continue to be the question that's increasingly determinative over both election outcomes and I would say business outcomes. I think it's increasingly, you hear a lot about content marketing. You see a lot of businesses doing, stuff where they invite people to participate in the conversation, where they share stories, where even just, in terms of what the advertising message is and that kind of thing, it's much less, sort of corporate speak and much more about stories of meaningful stories about how this or that business is changing lives. I think everybody is beginning to understand that the role of the individual is a lot greater than it was 5 or 10 years ago, and will be even greater 5 or 10 years from now. And so the question of how you, in an authentic way, honor and elevate those people and show that you're trying to empower them and give them access to resources and information is very critical. Now, that's easy to do in a political campaign where people, at least in most political campaigns, really care. Now, are people going to care about their credit card company or their clothing company or whatever in the same way they care about their politician they support? Not necessarily, but people do want to be treated with respect wherever they go, and they do want to be served appropriately and served well and served in an efficient way, in a way that doesn't waste their time, doesn't disrespect them by their credit card company, their clothing company, and whatever else, just as they do in politics. And so I think all businesses all around the world are going through this process of trying to determine what's the best way in which to begin to show more respect for their individual buyers, consumers, fans, whatever it may be, and give them more and more sort of access and resources and feedback mechanisms and ways in which they can really participate in the life of the company. There's a very famous website in the United States called BuzzFeed. I don't know if BuzzFeed is known here. All right, I see people's heads shaking. The founder of BuzzFeed said something in an interview maybe 6 or 8 months ago that I think about almost every day. He said, so for those of you who may not know, BuzzFeed is a social news website. And so it's in the business of creating content that it thinks people are going to want to share. So that they're less concerned with SEO. They don't spend a lot of time on advertising. It's really all about what's going to drive people to share. And he said they don't produce a lot of celebrity gossip content. And that's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because doesn't everybody love celebrity gossip? And he says, well, yes and no. Celebrity gossip is a guilty pleasure. And so, maybe you're at the airport and no one you know is around, and so you buy a celebrity tabloid and, you hope you don't wind up on the same flight as a coworker. But you don't share to Facebook the latest news about who got divorced or what celebrity was spotted where, because you're conscious of how you're seen and you want your friends to like and respect you and all that. And so, on the campaign, we found a very similar thing. We found that, for example, an attack on Governor Romney would actually not be our most effective piece of content in terms of social. In terms of paid media, it might be quite effective, and we could focus group an ad, and maybe it really would lower people's estimation of Governor Romney. But I think in just the same way that you don't necessarily want to be the kind of person who shares celebrity gossip on Facebook, you also don't want to be the kind of person who shares political rhetoric on Facebook, negative political rhetoric. And so we had a lot more success when we talked about women's rights, education, the environment, LGBT rights. And if you go look at, just look at our Facebook page from August, September, October of last year, you'll see a lot of sort of inspiring quotes that are very nonpartisan in nature and that have to do with sort of aspirational issues of things that people feel proud to stand up and say, that's what defines me. I mean, we would think about the campaign about a kind of a Venn diagram of the things that you actually care about and the things that you want your friends to think that you care about. And the overlap of that Venn diagram is where we had success. That's what gets shared. That's what sort of moves on social media. There was a report that was, a study that was reported in the New York Times a couple of months ago that said good news travels faster than bad news and travels more widely than bad news on social media. To me, this was no surprise at all, because it's the same thing. You get a piece of good news and you're enthusiastic about being the one who tells your friends about that. You get a piece of bad news and maybe you read it, but you don't feel that impulse to characterize yourself in that way and affiliate yourself with that piece of news or content. And so, those are the kinds of human characteristics that I think are quite international. So maybe there's not a culture of talking about politics here, but there's certainly that same impulse to think about what your friends think of you and and want to define yourself in a way that makes them more prone to like you and share stuff with them that's going to delight them and that's going to entertain them. And so that's why I know a lot of Americans like to do a lot of international political consulting. I'm sure they often dispense bad advice because the cultural differences are so strong. But I do think that human nature is quite sturdy, and there are aspects of it that transcend individual national cultures. That last thing I just said being, I think, one of them. And so thinking about how you can understand that shared, basic fact about humanity and then apply it appropriately in the corporate or political culture of an individual country or continent is obviously quite important.
And we rise or fall together as one nation and as one people.